Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Draft Room. This is the NFL Draft Podcast of the Packernet Podcast Network. If you'd like to call in, if you'd like to participate in the show, you can do so at 608-561-3243. That is the number to call. We do have a call in here from Jared the Uber driver. What's going on, Jared?
What's up, Draft Room? It's Jared. Calling back for second or third time. I don't know. I caught up on all the podcasts, as I mentioned on the main show. So, just out of curiosity, like, now that we've traded for Zaire Franklin, I know Wooden wasn't great, but does that raise when we need to draft a corner? Or not corner, sorry, defensive tackle? Do you think that, I think that would be, I don't think Gannon needs a pass rushing defensive tackle, so maybe leave Citrus back on the table. Oh, you found a green little toy snake? That's cool, baby. Can you finish your breakfast?
It's my toy.
It is your toy. That's right. All right.
It's your hair.
It has hair?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a crazy snake if you want a hairless snake. But yeah, do you think maybe Big Citrus is on the table, or we find one in free agency, so if we can go into the draft without needing a need, I guess. I don't know who we're going to pick up at corner if that's the case. And I know that's kind of how Goody kind of does it. Is he typically tries to pick up enough free agents so we don't necessarily need to go for a need, but best player available. Yeah. How do you think the recent transactions have affected the draft? Do you think corner first, then or defensive tackle first, then corner? Just let me know. Go back up.
Yeah.
What?
So what?
Oh yeah, that's a real big snake.
So I kind of talked about this a little bit on the regular Packernet show in regard to, I think, where the Packers are headed as far as defensive tackle, and it is a big Citrus type of guy. We'll have to see how free agency pans out. We'll have to see if, they end up getting that guy. I don't know how big of a priority it is. It may be somebody like, let's just go get somebody, anybody, not literally anybody, but a guy that can at least adequately fill that role, and let's focus on some more important things. Part of the reason I'm being pulled that direction is I have felt since Gutekunst did his press conference, corner has been front and center in my mind as far as where the Packers are headed. And you look at the most recent moves with the offensive line where they feel like, okay, we've got that all settled. Boom, that's done. We don't need to worry about that. That's obviously most of us don't really agree, but kind of feels like that's where the Packers have gotten themselves. They're content with a lot of different things. The thing that hasn't really changed, and I just saw, 2 minutes before I started this podcast, was I forget which one of the Packers beat writers, but essentially saying that Nate Hobbs probably not coming back. So Nate Hobbs probably not coming back. Gutekunst says it's a big need. So it's kind of this thing where you've got their biggest need and their most unaddressed position. It just feels like they're setting themselves up to go all in the draft, maybe free agency, we'll see, but I would doubt it, for the cornerback position. So, I think the two biggest are probably defensive tackle, because I do think Gannon is going to need that, that big run-stopping dude, that big force, that big anchor. But again, I don't know if Gutekunst is going to be like, yeah, he's going to treat it like a premium position. You know what I mean? As though the second round pick is going to be that pick. It might be, especially depending on how the board falls, but there's also kind of a lot of good corners in that range as well. So I guess to keep it 100% draft, I would say the top pick would probably end up being a corner. We would maybe think about defensive tackle starting in the third round, maybe even fourth if we can get away with it. But yeah, I think that's does it make it more likely? First off, not really. I think it just makes us more aware. Because again, it was after I looked into it and saw, it's a scheme mismatch, and that what we need is this particular type of guy that we didn't have before him. So we always needed this big boy for Gannon. He's always had that. He's always seemingly wanted that, and we just don't have it. At least not adequately, unless Gutekunst wants to be a complete scumbag and just say, no, you got it, and Jonathan Ford. Like, bro, I'll freaking kill you. No disrespect to Mr. Ford. So that would essentially be my thought. Is it more of a need? Not necessarily, but I think it highlights that we do have a need there that has just not been filled by anybody. But I still think corner is front and center in their mind, just based on the things they've done up to this point. And again, we'll see how free agency pans out. The things they've done up to this point and the comments they've made, where I think a lot of us are looking at defensive tackle and offensive line, so O-line, D-line. The Packers seem to be sitting there going, no, that's all fine. We need corners. I don't disagree that we need corner. It just would not have been my priority. And then, again, you see them just pay everybody on the offensive line. Like, well, we got a first-round pick, then a $20 million guard, which is appalling that they just restructured, meaning he's going to be here for the next 2 years at a minimum. We just paid a lot of money, presumably. We'll see the details of the contract for Sean Ryan to play center. We have a second-round pick at right guard, and we have Zach Tom at right tackle. So any investments on the offensive line presumably are more long-term, we'll see how it goes, developmental, backup type of prospects, which I'm not thrilled about, but that seems to be the direction we're going. So, all right, Jared, appreciate your call. Again, anybody else that wants to drop a comment, question, concern about the NFL draft, 608-561-3243. Okay. I don't know how long this is going to take, so I'll just say that this is what we're going to talk about today, and it may elaborate. But there was an article over on The Athletic done by Jordan Rodrigue, and the title of it is An Inside Look at How NFL Scouts Craft Their Scouting Reports. I don't necessarily want to go through the whole thing, but it definitely triggered something in my mind, because there's, once in a while you kind of just say stuff because it's just what you think. But there's these conflicts in the back of your mind that kind of just go unaddressed. One of the big conflicts that I've had is how weird it is when you look at, as I've highlighted several times on this show, on the Packernet show, when you listen to scouts or regional directors, or, depending on how high up it goes, how insanely different these scouts' opinions are on these players. And that'll be highlighted even more when Bob McGinn does his series, because, again, I always love doing the series, but I also hate it because I feel like we learn nothing. He'll usually have 4 scouts or 4 people he'll talk to in that arena, and you'll have, of the 4, he'll list it in order from likes them most to likes them least, and it will be, by the time you start, this is the greatest prospect in the history of the world, and by the time you end, he's not even on our board because he's a big fat pile of crap that sucks. And that doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't fit, and I never really thought about why entirely. I didn't put a lot of thought into it, other than it just doesn't really fit with my understanding of things. And the biggest complication is all of us are kind of going off of the same big board. The variance compared to randomness is essentially that they're all identical. You would think, especially given how much scouts and everybody else seem to think differently, that some people would have a guy as a first-round prospect, some would have him as a 6th, some would have him as a 4th, some would have him as a UDFA. But that doesn't generally seem to be how it happens. There's a couple of outliers, but even those outliers tend to be outliers that the NFL seems to agree on, that maybe we just didn't see coming. at least as far as guys falling. We don't really know those outliers when guys get picked early. Maybe that was the only team that felt that way. But when the NFL, when a person falls, we know that nobody in the NFL really felt he was a good value at the earlier picks because he would have been picked. So the point is, there's a lot of consensus, which doesn't make sense because whenever I get an opportunity to hear from people in the scouting community, there is no consensus. And so again, I couldn't rectify that until I looked into this article, and one main thing that I mean, I knew it existed, but I guess I just didn't really think about it as an important ingredient, really kind of changed the way I think about stuff. And it's an unfortunate thing, but I'll just summarize it this way. I think the missing ingredient, and I don't know this, but this is a current theory, the missing ingredient that ties these two very different things together is Blesto. Now, I'll use Blesto because it's a very old and well-known service, but it is not the only one. Blesto and NFS are the two main ones. NFS being the National Football Scouting whatever, or just a company. And essentially what happens is you are a member team, not a team member, a member team. You pay dues to this organization, and they use those dues to employ scouts because it's easier to share the, if you have, 15, 16 teams paying dues, you can hire a lot of scouts with that. As opposed to if each team individually had to pay for that amount of scouts, it would be 16x, 16 times the cost. The downside is that it's all shared information. And it's not really public which teams use which. I know there were times like Bill Belichick would like to keep everything perfectly in-house. I don't know if that's really a thing anymore or if all 32 teams are using it. But the bottom line is you have the more modern NFS, which is, a little bit more of a modern company with modern data, ties into the combine and all this different stuff. Blesto is a very old school, pen and paper scouting report type of a thing. But a lot of places do like it, first of all, for teams that like to be a little bit more old school, but also because there's a consistent process and reporting structure that they all kind of understand. And so, I guess the bottom line is I think for most people, we assume that 32 teams have massive scouting staffs that go out and personally do all the scouting and the handshaking and all that kind of stuff. And then they come back and they very privately assemble their own boards with no shared data. And just because they follow the same process roughly, they come out with very, very similar boards. That's not the case at all. They all actually subscribe to similar systems or scouting companies who all go out and do their own scouting, their own evaluations, their own injury reporting, and then they share that data across the league. So I want to dive into that topic a little bit today. Why don't we take our first break, though? We'll be right back. So, again, just kind of starting from the top, it isn't the case that teams are independently building boards. Teams are employing staffs and kind of shaping the draft boards around the leagues. Blesto was founded in 1963. It was a partnership between the Bears, Lions, Eagles, and Steelers. That's where Blesto comes from. It was kind of this idea by those teams to say, hey, what if we pool our resources a little bit here? That grew into a larger organization that a bunch of teams started subscribing to. NFS, National Football Scouting, formed a little bit after that. It's a little bit more modernized, competitive, competing consortium. Teams pay membership fees, and they access the reports that these guys put out. And these reports come out very early. So it's kind of like when you, after the draft, for example, they'll get their time off, whatever the case may be. When they reconvene and they say, okay, let's get started on the 2027 draft now, Blesto and NFS are going to put a report on your desk. but it really just expands your staff because there's no way an NFL team's staff could do all the heavy lifting. So they can deploy their scouts much more regionally than teams can. Yes, we obviously have regional scouts, but regions are massive. And so, especially some of the smaller schools or things like that, you want to prioritize, okay, I want you to go check out, Georgia, Alabama, these schools. There's going to be smaller schools that maybe you're not going to send your guys to. And so this is where one of the areas where these guys are going to be a little bit more valuable. They've got the standardized evaluations that everybody can understand, that everybody, kind of appreciates the consistency, the format, the grading scale. And it's in depth. It's not just this player's good, this player's bad. It also gets into background and character information, interview with coaches, academic records, off-field flags. And so the bottom line is teams all have their independent processes, their independent needs, their independent this, that, or the other thing. But most of them, again, let's say 16 teams subscribe to Blesto, they're starting with the same board and then they tweak. So when you've got sort of this, day 3 linebacker from some smaller school, their baseline understanding is identical because your baseline understanding starts exactly from the same report. Then you have your own process. Does this guy fit what we want to do? Do we want to evaluate it further? Should we send somebody out there to meet him? Should we put some of this, that, or the other on it? These are going to be tweaks, but they're not going to be tweaks enough, by the way, that sends this day 3 linebacker up to the first round. Now, there's a couple different reasons for this. Number one, I mean, these are all scouts, so it's unlikely that different scouts are going to come in with vastly different views on that player. They'll largely probably agree with the assessment when they go watch the tape themselves. But there's also a thing called anchoring bias. And anchoring bias basically means the first thing you see is the thing that you're going to most believe. Meaning it's going to take a lot of force to move you off of that first thing that you came to believe and understand. So if Blesto says this guy's grade's a 5.8, and let's say that if this scout were to look at it independently, they would have come to a 6.4. The fact that Blesto says he's a 5.8, and we see this in the scouting community at large in the media. I'm talking like guys on social media, those types of scouts. But even if he would have seen by himself it was a 6.4, he's unlikely to come to that determination having seen Blesto say he's a 5.8. We see this all the time where, there are some people who come to very fringe beliefs on players and all that kind of stuff. I think that's great. I love when you see stuff like that. They'll call first-round prospects, third-round prospects, but everybody else calls them an idiot. Nobody believes that. That's not true. Blah, 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 blah. So in the aggregate, you see most people responding to, I've seen the mock drafts. I've seen what people say. And so therefore, I know what the real answer is. Well, you're seeing that anchoring bias. Whereas if there never was, and I've always thought this would be kind of interesting or fun, I don't think it can exist, but what if you could judge a player? What would be kind of cool is if you had something where there was like tape that came out, but you couldn't see the field logos, you couldn't see the the name on the back of the jersey, the number, none of that. All you could see was the player, and you could grade that player. Do you know how shockingly different everybody's opinions would be? Maybe less so in the actual scouting community because they tend to use the same metrics and everything else. But it would be very, very different. In other words, if you took a random fan and I said, okay, here is the top linebacker prospect or something. He's currently on the consensus board at, 20. Here's his tape. Go watch it and tell me what you think. They might come away going, I don't really know, or I really liked him or whatever. At best, they would say something like, I didn't get it. I see him more as like a late first, maybe early second. If you had shown that person the same thing and I didn't tell you he was a first round pick or whatever, I didn't tell you any of that stuff, and I said, where would you put him? You probably hear something more like, I don't know, 6th round. But they'd never say that knowing the consensus is first round. And so again, we want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, especially these scouts. No, they're professionals. They know, and they certainly would never believe that if you were to ask them directly. No, absolutely not. I'm a professional. I know how to do this stuff. I've disagreed with lots of people all the time. I know that you think that, but this is an unconscious thing that you don't know that you're doing. Now, one of the interesting dynamics here is if everybody, let's say everybody just took exactly what Blesto said, and that was their entire board, and they didn't deviate anything. They just said, this is it, and they went from that. The biggest problem is that over the long haul, you don't separate yourself, which is the entire point of the NFL, is to separate yourself. You need to be better than everybody else. So if you're the same as everybody else, you can't expect to be better than everybody else. You can't expect to be a Super Bowl team. You might be, but that would just be entirely luck. It's a 1 in 32 chance if 32 teams are using it and just doing the exact same thing. So how do you separate yourself? You have to be willing to most deviate from the consensus. You have to be a culture that really challenges these things and really listens to people who have some pretty crazy stuff to say. I know the Ravens and the Eagles are teams that are historically very, let's just say they're very well known for that, because you have to be. Now, being different could be worse, and you certainly don't want to be worse, and you don't want to just be different for the sake of different, but you have to find those areas. You have to find the edge. It's just like with betting. If you just bet the consensus every time, you're going to lose all your money. You have to find edges. You have to understand that I need to find these little tiny areas where we can find something that nobody else will. And if you can't do that, you won't be able to separate yourself. But we also know, again, based on the fact that most teams are going to draft right in line with what the consensus board is, which hilariously enough, all the guys on, how do we know they're going in line with the consensus board? Because it's the same board we all have. How do we have it? Because it's so, I hate to use the word, let me think of a different one. I don't know, let's just say intermingled. First of all, I know that there's media guys that are going to get these Blesto reports. They're not supposed to have access to it, but you know it's going to. But even beyond that, a lot of this is just, it's speaking to these people. The best in the business, and there's guys who are very good at this stuff, obviously, in the media with their scouting and all that stuff. But if teams with staffs of 12 to 15 different scouts don't have the manpower to scout all these different people, how is Daniel Jeremiah going to be able to do this for 200, 300 different prospects? A lot of it is talking to people. And the only people worth talking to are people that are in the know. It's being friends with people that are on these teams or scouts or all that. Maybe they're friends with scouts from Blesto. And so it becomes groupthink. Guys like Bob McGinn view somebody as a third-round prospect, not because he spent, hours and hours grinding the tape on guys. I'm sure he watches, just like a lot of us watch, and I'm sure he has, valuable opinions and insights for having done this for a long time. But Bob McGinn's biggest superpower isn't his ability to watch tape. It's his ability to know people that are in the know and talk to them and get their perspectives. And so when he hears from people, what he hears from people, that's where a lot of his opinions are coming from. And this is going to be the same for a lot of people in the media. And then there's sort of a second level of people in the media who take that consensus and they build off of that consensus. And so everybody kind of has the same board, to the point where if a guy that had what we all thought was going to go in the third round slips to the seventh round, we're all shocked. What the heck happened? What did we miss? And yeah, that's one of those weird situations where some information slipped through the cracks somewhere. But it's rare. For the most part, we all kind of know what the board looks like. When you and I go to the, NFL draft board thing, what is that called? NFL draft database or something? When you go there and you look at that board, no, that's not going to be directly from Blesto, but we have all, essentially that data has leaked to such a degree that we are all kind of looking at the same boards. Now, that's relative. I'm not saying the number 24 is going to be the number 24 across the board. Not at all. But the deviation is going to be much smaller than what you would expect otherwise. Then there's something a little bit further where I think about half the league, obviously we don't know, but I think that the the thought or whatever is about half the league subscribes to both Blesto and NFS. What happens if somebody has roughly a 6 or a 5.9 grade in both of those? That sort of double reinforcement, are you really going to challenge that super hard? All right, let's take our final break, and we'll, I guess, put a bow on this thing. So again, once this report comes out, and I don't know the exact date that these reports come out, but obviously there's going to be scouting during the season and whatnot, scouting on information that they've already begun with. But the report hits their desk, and the GM then takes it from there, and the teams get to work along with their scouting staff. And the scouting staff obviously has been doing work along with, because, again, remember, the Blesto and the other service are like extensions of your staff. So while Blesto and those guys are going out scouting and doing everything else, so are you and your staff. And so, again, this is all done now. Now we need to try to start to separate ourselves. We have our scouting staff, which helps because they've gone and found information that other teams presumably did not. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but with their own opinions, and that'll change some things. We also have some upcoming events that are coming up. Now, the complication here is to try to find details other people are missing. Because when you go to the East-West Shrine Bowl, or when you go to the Senior Bowl, everybody else is there too. When you have interviews with guys, they all have interviews with them too. And so picking who to interview, how to interview, so that maybe we can find those little details that other guys can't. When we watch the same thing that everybody else is watching, do we notice something that other people don't notice? Because if a guy dominates the Senior Bowl, we all saw him dominate the Senior Bowl. If a guy does well in interviews, he probably did well with everybody else. Maybe if you got the interview last, he's getting a little tired, he's getting a little hungry, he's getting a little cranky, and it doesn't go very well. But a lot of this is going to be difficult to separate. Even though there's a lot more information that comes out post the Blesto report, finding information that other people can't find, like the medicals. They all get the medicals. But every team is going to go through the process of slightly tweaking. We're going to move him up just a touch. We're going to move him down a little bit here. We're going to put him over here. We're going to take this guy off our board. All these different things are what make and break your team, and really what make or break how good your GM is. I also think it speaks to how much it overstates the GM thing. Because most of the 32 different GMs have extremely similar boards. And even if you have a slight edge, the odds that everything kind of falls your way are still largely random. I mean, it's mostly luck that goes into this. I've said this 1,000 times, but it really is mostly luck. And you would have to have a long period of time with the exact same 32 GMs. If you gave the same 32 GMs the exact same situations over and over again for 100 years, you might be able to start to see how they deviate and which ones tend to come out on top and which ones have the better process. But interspersed throughout that, you're going to have really good GMs that have way better process than everybody else having terrible years. Because a lot of this is it's just what falls. That guy you wanted got drafted, and so you went to your next best prospect, and that guy was a bust. So that big board, that scouting report, all that stuff, they're seen as sort of like living documents. They're not static. It's not like, okay, in January, boom, he's our number 47 guy or whatever. We're constantly trying to get new information, better information, so that we can keep these things moving and get that, the more information we put in, we assume the more accurate and the more tight our board is going to align with reality. But it is difficult because by the time the Senior Bowl rolls around, or especially the Combine rolls around, you've had a lot of time to burn something into your head. This guy's a third-round pick. This guy's a third-round pick. He's definitely a third-round pick. And then he runs faster than you think, and there's going to be a lot of denial. There's going to be a lot of, okay, whatever, it doesn't matter. He's still a third-round pick. I don't care. As opposed to if this is the first time you'd seen him do that, or if you got the report that day, you might be more in line to say, I don't know, dude, that might be a second-round pick. But I think we all know, too, that medicals are probably one of the biggest things. This is why teams talk about this so much. That's one of the biggest movers on this board. The problem is that's all centralized also. These guys are not getting checked out 32 times by 32 different teams. There are neutral physicians that run the tests that the teams require them to run, and then the 32 teams will review that. And so there is where you get your slight nuance if you have a really good medical staff, and you can pull somebody aside and have, the Chiefs could have their own orthopedic specialist there to say, hey, we need to take a second look at this guy for better or for worse. The report came out saying that the x-rays are X, Y, and Z and that they're actually okay. And our ortho guy says, I'm not so sure about that. I think we should take a deeper look. And if you find something, then you have a bit of an advantage. There might be other teams that do the exact same thing, but that's where you would have an advantage. So again, it's what ways can we find these slight advantages? And if medicals are a big one, then we need to have a really good medical staff. I think the Patriots and the Eagles are two teams that are known for having really high quality medical staffs. Go ahead.
Someone is at the front door.
Great. That, can really give you a big advantage. And that's positive and negative. It's not just pulling guys off our board. It might be, they said this guy's not good, but we went and looked at it again, and actually he's fine, so we're going to grab him. I think one of the interesting things about the Senior Bowl, too, and I'm sure it's all recorded and everything for them to review, but one interesting thing is, even though everybody is there and everybody's kind of seeing the same things, the 32 teams don't send their entire staffs there, and they're not all looking at the same things. So essentially what you've got is you've got a scout or two or three or whatever, however many that go there, and they're going to send updates, text messages, emails, whatever it is, immediately back to the team's war room. What you see and how you interpret that and what you send back to them is going to shape how you view these prospects. If you're looking at a different drill or you're looking at a different guy during a drill or something to that effect, and you don't see it and somebody else does, there you go. Again, most of the time they're all going to see the same things and they're mostly going to report back the same things. But these are the tiny little nuance differences that can change boards. This is also how people tend to fall, because I think what's interesting about the fallers, and it could be, again, risers could be the same thing, but I think the big boards that we have get a little bit more locked in than maybe where some of the teams are. There might be some data floating around that just doesn't reach its way to us. And so again, we end up shocked and appalled, but in reality, it's just a guy that wasn't being updated for whatever reason. The reasoning, the thought process, whether it might be a medical concern or something that they're not going to be leaking out to people. These are the kinds of things that cause somebody to fall where we just don't see it. But again, as boards get updated, we tend to upgrade them as well. And we do it in the same way that they do. Why? Because the people who are the movers and shakers, the big top guys, they're the ones talking to the scouts. And that goes to them. And then they put out new big boards and mock drafts. And they put on their shows, their podcasts, and their YouTube channels. And then we consume that. And so that informs how we think of these people. But it all comes from the same place. The other area of differentiation, and it really shouldn't be different, but it is based on how stubborn teams are, is technology. Technology has revolutionized scouting. And so you've got kind of an analytics versus film guy dynamic going on in a lot of places. And some teams are very up on the tech revolution and are getting deep into it. Some teams like a little bit more, pen and paper, hand stopwatch type stuff. And there's also internal strife within these teams in terms of, the analytics guys want to be heard and the scout guys want to put down the analytics guys and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that it's necessarily different information. Everybody has the same film with the same GPS information. Maybe they have their own specific way of trying to break that down. This is kind of like with the company that just purchased PFF or is going to purchase PFF or whatever. This is kind of their main thing. They're buying up every proprietary tool that is being used by teams such as this type of stuff. And again, that's just going to make sure that everybody has the same data all the time. But there is a question of how much do you value it? And that could make a very big difference. Because if scouts feel that this guy's not good, but all the metrics are pointing to him being quite good, and one team leans very heavily on technology, one team leans very heavily on the scouting, that's where some guys are going to go way earlier than other teams would even consider taking someone. And again, you've got Eagles, Ravens kind of on the forefront of that. I think every team is doing it to some degree, but that seems to be two teams that are kind of out in front. And then your GM essentially is the final word. So, there's so much internal debate and strife. We've got our original reports. We got the medicals. We got all these things. We're going to move this here and there. You got scouts bickering about their different opinions and who's right and who's wrong. You got the analytics angle and everything else. The GM's the guy that's going to nail that person down right there. He's going to finalize the board and be the final word on exactly how things fall. So, again, I was just excited to see that, and because, again, it kind of answered the question that never made sense to me. And we'll, again, revisit this when Bob McGinn does his series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will demonstrate it to you. It doesn't make sense how similar we all are on these prospects. We all the way down to the most casual fan, all the way up to the top GMs and owners and everything else. How do we all look at a very similar board when nobody agrees on it? I mean, especially scouts. You listen to people on YouTube or Twitter or whatever, they'll all basically say the same thing because they're all going to agree with what the board says. And if you disagree, you're the worst person in the history of the world. He's not a third-round pick. He's a second-round pick, and everyone knows it. Okay, well, fine. God forbid anyone has a slightly different opinion. But these scouts, they don't agree. So why do they agree? Because the majority of the information that they have is set by the information that is being shared across the league. That's why. Okay, I'm going to get out of here. You all have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.